Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Julie Hayton, who is the Managing Director at Function Jigsaw. Julie, thank you for joining me.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Before we get cracking, I did see the Everton shirt in the background there, which I was excited to see in one way, but you tell me that isn't genuine.
No, it's not. No, it's literally my family's idea of a joke, because they're all, with the exception of myself and my cousin, all Evertonians. So when we opened the clinic, they chipped in, bought me a signed Everton shirt, and framed, beautiful. I've got the provenance and everything. So it's up on the wall just to show that I've got no hard feelings. But yeah, it's a joke.
Right.
Yeah. Bit like Everton.
Yeah, indeed. No, they're struggling at the moment. Who do you support then?
Liverpool.
So how come everyone supports Everton but only you support Liverpool then?
Because I think from a child I've been really headstrong. It stood me in good stead in some situations. But I think when you're told often enough not to do something, you will not support the Red. I thought for years there was only two teams in the whole world. I thought there was Everton and the team in red that should not be spoke about. And I was told so often not to support them after a bit of an altercation, I don't know, about me not eating Kellogg's Rice Krispies or something. I just thought, right, this will annoy my dad. I'm going to support Liverpool. And that's what I did. That's how it started. And it's turned out to be a really good deal over the years, to be honest.
It definitely is a better deal than yeah, I can definitely attest to that, being an Everton fan. But yeah, so where are you from then originally?
So I was born in Wales. I'm very proudly Welsh. But all my family are predominantly from Liverpool. We moved back to Liverpool when I was quite young. And then we moved across to Wigan. We lived there for quite some years. And then I moved down to Leicester. And then actually my sister came to Leicester, and then after my father sadly passed away, my mum came down to Leicester. So we're all in Leicester, that little cohort of the family. But everybody else is still up north, predominantly, yeah, in Liverpool. So I'd say my family are predominantly Scousers.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, just fell off. Look at that.
That's all right. So yeah, while you're sorting that out then, so what made you move to Leicester?
Work. So I, funnily enough, I had always wanted to be a vet when I was younger. Vet. Nothing was going to deter me from being a vet until I had a careers talk and somebody pointed out that animals might die. Hadn't thought of that. That wasn't in the script at all. I just thought I was going to save everything. And I'm a real animal sort of person. I have to search on the internet before I watch a film the site, does the dog die? Because if the dog dies in the film, I'm distraught for days. So I can't do that. And then I should have probably gone into sport or something at that point, but I went into mechanical engineering, and I did a mechanical engineering apprenticeship with British Nuclear Fuels for 4 years, and passed that, did that. So I was a nuclear scientist for a bit. And then I moved down to Leicester for work. I was doing a bit of work with design agencies and teams in Leicester. And I randomly decided to get into fitness and qualified as a fitness coach, because I'd always done athletics and all that sort of stuff before I came down. And I got into a bit of a challenge with a local football team that I thought that they couldn't do 45 minutes of circuit training. It would be harder than playing football. They thought they could. They didn't. They failed miserably. And I noticed that the people that were injured weren't doing anything. And I couldn't get my head around what was happening. And so I kind of started doing a bit of fitness work with the injured guys. Then I realised that there was nobody pitch side. So I started on all the FA medical courses. And, you know, people being injured to me spoke to me, because it is just a form of engineering. You know, A plus B 9 times out of 10 has to equal C for something to work properly. So it kind of fitted my mindset. And so I kind of just got into it by default, really, because of a bet, I suppose. That's how I got into it originally. And then I carried that on and went to do a degree in sports rehab at Salford University, and landed on my feet in my 3rd year with my work experience with Leicester City. And then I never looked back. I gave up my job and I started working in the industry, and that's where it all started. A bit convoluted, but we got there.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I never knew that. So that's you would have been perfect. We've just recruited for a service engineer. You'd been great, because you can do.
Oh, I tell you, if you get injured as well, and when I'm on site, perfect.
Exactly. You understand the rehab and the equipment even better. No, that's ideal. So yeah, Salford's always got a good reputation in terms of the courses that they do there for sports. So we do a lot of work with the guys there, and Basrat's a really good organisation. So what made you want to do sports rehab?
Originally, when I looked into it, I looked at physiotherapy, and the timings of the course for me weren't right. I just wanted to get on with what I wanted to do. So the entry for rehab was available to me at that point, and physio was oversubscribed. Should I have waited another year? I don't think so, because the course I've done and the opportunities it's given me has been fantastic, and I'm really passionate about sports rehab because the degree is very similar to physiotherapy. It's your practical, your later, your third year that is very, very different, And so I've never regretted doing sports rehab at all. And I'm so pleased that I did it, because it just spoke to me, and it was a lot more of a practical course, and, wasn't quite as hospital based, which wouldn't have suited me at all. I knew the environments I wanted to be in, and I knew the environments that I would thrive in.
And did you find it hard then, coming from, I suppose you'd had the fitness in the middle, but coming from that engineering side?
No, not really, because actually I think doing all the FA stuff first, all their first aid courses that they run, their basics, their intermediates, and then they do some more advanced learning. They've really put some really good courses together, and it gave you a really good grounding. I mean, albeit it's basic, some of it, the advanced courses are obviously not, but it kind of gave me a good grounding to know what I was going to expect when I got into the degree, and I had an underlying set of knowledge that I could go into, And again, I put my degree helped me a bit, I think, because as in mechanical degree, because all the science and the biomechanics of how the body works and how it's got injured and how you can stop it, getting injured, reduce getting injured, just spoke to me, because again, A plus B had to equal C. I'm a very analytical person, and it spoke to me. So I think that it actually stood me in better stead than some people who'd got to the course through what would be classed as a normal route.
Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting. I've not heard of that combination before, but it does make sense when you explain it. And in terms of the dynamic of your course mates on that course, were they very different? Like, what was the dynamic like, and what have they gone on to do as well?
No, the dynamic was diverse, but then similar. I know that sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but everyone was from because the course we were doing was a part-time course. There was a lot of people on the course that were either mature students or people who'd gone away, done something different, wanted to come back into that type of education. So I always think I think it's good when you go on a course like that, rather than the traditional sort of A-level straight into a degree course. So you're very lucky and privileged if you know what you want to do at that age, because you follow that route, and who's to say that you've got the life experience to know that is what you want to do ultimately, So I think a lot of the people on my course had been and done, were already working at clubs, were already working within sport, or had been and done something else and observed that's the career they would like to get into. So I would say that everyone on the course wanted to be there for the right reason, and we all bounced off each other. It's a really interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it before, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I've had that with a couple of people where they've gone in at maybe a later stage. Like I was so immature when I chose to do sports science, but I was happy I did, but it was only by luck. But I think a few people have said that it's a really considered decision. You may work a bit harder as well, because you value it a bit more. And then when you took the course, though, did you have in mind, I want to work in sport then?
Yeah, because I was already obviously working within sport, thanks to my FA qualifications. So I was working in and around football a lot, and as you can see, I've been brought up on football. I understand the offside rule. That's what I know. I understand football. I get it. I understand the athletes in it. I understand the positions. I understand tactics, and so it was a nice environment for me to be in. But I always felt like I knew I wanted to learn more. I wanted to do it for myself. I don't know whether I had aspirations of working in professional sport at that point. I don't know. I just wanted to be better at what I did. And I saw it as something that I was good at and I could do. And don't forget that while I was at uni, I was paying my way through uni. So I was working as well. And it was a part-time course. And I was doing a lot of project management and still working within that engineering sector, albeit within point of sale. So I didn't have aspirations at that point, and I know that now when I lecture to people and I talk about my experiences or where they want to go with life, and I know certainly talking to younger students, if I ask them if they're in sports science or they're in sports rehab, why are they doing it? Why do they want to do it? And 9 times out of 10 people will say to me, because I want to work in professional sport. And then when I ask them why, honestly, the answer I get a lot is kudos. That's the answer. They want the kudos. And it's I have the slide ready because I know what's coming, but I know that I have to then explain that kudos is something that you earn. You don't do it because of kudos, and it's a hard old road, and it's a very niche profession working in professional and elite sport, if you think about it, compared to the mass market of people being injured in that industry,
Yeah, no, definitely. So were you actually commuting then up to Salford and then for
yes.
that?
Yeah, so we'd have the odd lecture day that we'd have to go to, but more often than not, we'd have like a 3 or 4 week block full time in the summer that we had to go and do. And then everything was either distance learning or going up for the odd day. So it was quite tough. But actually working within engineering and doing project management, that's always been the thing, I think, when I reflect, that set me apart from other people, especially in rehab, because it's a very structured approach to how you rehab somebody back. They start here, they have to finish there. There's processes in between. And when does one stop and when does one start? And what do you need to do before the next one starts, And in engineering, if you're building, if you're building a car or a nuclear reactor, I suppose, you need a start point, and you need widget A to come before widget B can be put to thing C. And, if you've got thing C but no widget A, you can't fit widget B to C because something's missing. And so I was always very structured and very sort of like scheduled with my approach. And I think when you go through the traditional model of school, A-levels, degree, work placement, sometimes you miss out on that because you haven't had any other work experiences that you can bring to the environment and just approach it from a different way.
Yeah. Oh, no, I definitely agree with that. I think work experience would be crucial alongside any sort of academic background as well. So how did you get that placement at Leicester City?
Oh, I was lucky. It was just the talking to the right person at the right time who knew somebody else, and they had a friend who worked at Leicester City, who was the first team physio, a guy called Mick Yeoman, and he was the first guy that ever gave me a chance to work at that level. And they were looking for somebody to work with the academy, the junior academy, and I went down, had a chat with him. He said, "Would I be keen to get involved?" I said yes, and that was it. I was working for Leicester City for the academy, and then I progressed to do a little bit more work with the reserves for the senior team. And believe it or not, my first team game that I attended was at the old Filbert Street. Was it the old Filbert Street? Actually, I lie. It was the new ground. It was the new ground the first year, and they played Liverpool.
Right.
In the dugout while Patrick Berger's ripping it up on the wing as a young therapist that's just sitting in the dugout quietly trying to not cheer when Liverpool score because I thought it'd be quite bad form. And I think I recall that the score was 3-0.
Right.
to Liverpool. So that was quite an interesting start to my career with the first team. But yeah, that's how I got in Leicester City. Like I say, right place, right time.
So if it was, that's like late 90s then, was that?
So when I qualify, 90, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but that was good because again, I was exposed to people like Martin O'Neill, who was he comes across as a nice, quietly spoken guy, but he's quite scary. And I remember he said something that stuck with me all of the time. And when he first said it, I didn't understand what he meant. And he was doing a team talk and he was quite angry about something. And he said, it's not about what you do under the floodlights, in the light, in front of people. It's not about that. What you do in the dark will help what you do in the light. And if you don't work in the dark, you'll never perform in the light. And I was thinking to myself, what is he talking about? I thought there was something wrong with the electrics. I wasn't sure what was happening. But the more I've worked with team sports and the more I've worked with athletes, I know exactly what he means now. It is all about what you do in the background, how you manage yourself, who you work with, how players apply themselves, how you structure yourself, and all that hard work that goes on in the background. And hopefully it delivers in the light. So that always stood me in good stead. So if the best thing I got from Leicester City was my first rung on the ladder, and that one statement from him, then that has set me up for quite a successful career.
That's great, that, isn't it? I love when you hear those just very simple statements. I've not heard that one before, but that's really fascinating. I've actually just watched the documentary on Nottingham Forest winning the European Cup. So he was sort of a part of that setup, wasn't he, around that time?
Was, yeah.
So what was he like as a character then? You mentioned he was a bit scary.
He was scary because he was a very considered man. He didn't say an awful lot, but he knew a lot. And he had a great talent to know where somebody was at any one time. So if you're walking through the gym and there's a young academy kid on the bike being injured, he would know his name. He'd know where he was in his rehab, and just ask him one quick question: how are you getting on? Jules tells me this, and the kid feels $1 million. Whether he thinks about him ever again doesn't matter, but that was a really good strength of his. He just cared about people and he knew exactly what was what, but he wouldn't tolerate any kind of messing about. But yeah, he was good to see in action at such an early stage of my career, as I've just come out of uni and just was dropped into it. And watching him work was incredible, really. He was a good guy. He had an assistant manager that was John Robertson, who was the complete opposite end of the scale. He was the conduit between the players and him, and he was a crazy character, mad as a box of frogs, funny character, really, really funny guy. But they were a really good pair. That's how they worked.
Right, is that the John Robertson then? So he was like the legendary winger.
Yes.
And so I didn't know much about him, but watching him play, they were saying he was like the Ryan Giggs, but could kick with his right foot as well.
Yes, apparently he could. Yeah, I don't know much about him when he played. I know that as a person and as a coach, he was just that guy that the players related to, and that just funny, just a funny man. Just funny. But yeah, good. It was good experience.
And then in terms of just you being like a female going into those environments, was there ever any issue with that, like when you were getting involved with the first team or even at any level?
Do you know, in the environment, I would say no. I think once you go into the environment, and what I'm about to say now is going to sound really, really odd, but I think as a female going into that environment, sometimes you've got to accept that you're going to have to prove yourself. People are going to, it's the way of the world that people expect you to fail in those environments, But what I have found in those environments is that if you come in and you do what you say you can do, and if you don't know, you ask, and you are gracious with your being, if you are in that environment, people just accept you and you get on and nobody notices. And the funny thing is, when you've been accepted when you can walk into a dressing room and nobody even notices who you are, where if you walked a random female in, there'd be chaos, and I would always say to them, well, why? We had a female photographer going once, and I said to them, look, they're just clearing up after the game. Are you sure you want to go in? This is when I was with Tigers. And she's like, yeah, I'll go in. And I'm thinking, my God. She went in and she come out. She was, her hair was all stuck to her head. There was like the showers were all going. So there was steam everywhere. There was just so much shouting and bawling going on. And she came out and I went back in. Nobody said a word. And I said, well, why does she get all that attention? I walk in, they went, well, you're just Jules, aren't you? You're not a real girl. Oh, okay, thanks. But that's okay, because now they don't see me as anything. They don't see me as a girl. They don't see me as a boy, a bloke, a man. I could have been a three-legged giraffe. If I can do my job, they're not bothered. They just want somebody to be good and crack on. That's all. And I've found that in all the environments I've been in. I've never really had, hand on heart, any issues at all being a female in a predominantly male environment at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's good, isn't it? That's really good if that can happen.
I think I've had more stick from supporters, to be honest, especially in football. Yeah, especially in football. And
have you had it where you're running on and you're getting stick there?
Yeah. Oh, I've been spat on. I've been called names. Women are worse than men. I've been tripped up. I've had things thrown at me. All sorts of things. Yeah. I had to take my dad to a game once. Before we got into the ground, I had to stop him and say, Dad, you need to understand that I'm going to get some stick. And he's, well, what do you mean? So I tried to explain it to him. Well, he was appalled afterwards. He really was upset. And I said, you just become used to it. They can't hurt me per se, And he's watched Wigan Athletic for years, because when they moved to Wigan, he couldn't afford to go back to watch Everton. And he'd watched Wigan Athletic for years. And I said, Dad, and the car home, I said, if you and Tony were stood on the terraces at Springfield Park and the opposition turned up with a female physio and she ran on the pitch, what would you and Tony do? And he pondered this for about 10 seconds and he went, yeah, good point. So he doesn't really mean any harm. People just see it as a difference, Should I have to put up with it? No. But people do, and you're never going to change. I'd like to say you could change it. I'm sure that female referees and female people, however we refer to people now, get it all the time, and I just don't know how you would stop it. You just can't stop it,
But what is that like, though? If getting spat on is obviously repulsive, but then you get tripped up, how do you respond to those things?
You're in a very tough situation because you can't really respond. You can't really respond because you actually aggravate the situation. The only thing you can do is, at the time, report it to, stewards, and they then deal with it. But you can't respond at all in that situation, You just can't, because it would just make things worse, And it would make things worse for the people following you as well, because, people see that it's okay to do. It's not okay to do. So you're always caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't you? Do you remonstrate at the time? Do you speak about it? And that's why changing, and it's, don't forget that I was at Tigers for 15 years. And so it was very interesting to go from football, that kind of environment, into a rugby environment and being exposed to a rugby crowd and that kind of atmosphere, because it is chalk and cheese, And I did a bit of work with Sheffield United a couple of years ago, and they asked me if I'd go to a game with them, and we went to, check this out for a match to go back to on your first time with football for a while, Millwall away. That was an interesting game, and it just came back to me. I just thought, all the time I've been away, it's not changed at all. It's not changed at all. They just see something that they can focus their tribal, it's just a tribal thing, isn't it? You know that you could probably take 9 people out of 10 out of the crowd and have a chat to them, and they would be appalled with their own behaviour, and they wouldn't be happy with how they'd behaved. They've probably got daughters themselves and wouldn't be happy with how they've behaved. but in mass, it's like a, you know, it's like a snowflake. A snowflake will melt as soon as it hits the ground, you know, but en masse they can stop traffic. So it's the same thing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
It's a difficult one to deal with, and you know, it's great that we're moving on and society is moving on, and you know, there's opportunity for everybody. But it's just those tribal things that happen, and it's not right. You know, there should be changes made, but it's how you change it and how you influence it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely mob mentality, isn't it, when you're in those environments. So was that wasn't to do with the reason why you moved on to rugby then, or was it?
No. Again, another strange turn of events. I was training at a gym in Leicester, and I got chatting to a girl down there, and she had a bit of tape on her knee, and we got talking. We met a couple of times for coffee because our paths would cross. And she told me she was running the London Marathon. She told me that she had seen a therapist about what was going on with her knee. It wasn't really getting better. And I said, well, I'll have a look at it for you if you want. So I had a look at it for her, and we fixed it within a couple of sessions. You know, she just had a tight IT band, and we sorted it out. It wasn't rocket science. She turned out to be Austin Healey's wife. And I didn't know this, bearing in mind that I'd lived in Wigan for several years and never watched a rugby match in my life. I had no idea what was going on. So she introduced me to him. I treated him a few times, and then they asked me to look at one of the other players who was struggling a little bit. And he walked into the room, and this huge giant of a man walked in the room, and I again had no idea who this person was. And it turned out to be Martin Johnson, and he had an Achilles issue. And again, we just cracked on, and we fixed it. And he's done me a couple of really nice testimonials about, you know, how he originally met. He still comes in now to see us here, and because of that, and because I've seen a few people sort of outside the club, they kind of requested that I go to the club, and I went part-time, just on a sessional basis really. But I originally went as a massage therapist to work with their massage team, because obviously my rehab degree at that point was really quite new, and people weren't really considering it as a viable qualification to be included in like a multidisciplinary team. So that's how I started. It was literally, again, just being in the right place at the right time. And I went over to rugby, and the first game that I worked, I was a little bit late getting out by a minute or so, just because I was collecting all the stuff up for the guys. And we were 7-0 down, and I thought the world had ended. I thought we should just all pack up and go home. I'm like, 7-0. Imagine coming out, Everton are 7-0 down after a minute. You wouldn't bother, would you? Which is possible at the moment. But they were like, really, Julie, you need to learn the rugby scoring system here, because it's like 1-0. I was having a real panic attack. But I learned it, and I learned to appreciate the game of rugby. And now I can watch any rugby that is on the telly, any rugby. Where football, I now have to choose my game that I watch, and I have huge respect for people who play rugby, work in rugby now, because of you know, having been involved with it for so long. So yeah, that's how I ended up at Leicester Tigers.
So what were the differences then between football and rugby?
I think that because rugby is so position specific, and it relies so heavily on the guys being conditioned to play rugby. You know, it's yes, football require to be conditioned, and it's all scientific now, and it's very similar. We have very similar positions, very similar athlete types in football, you know, and rugby is so specific between backs and forwards for a start, you know, but then the forwards, you know, you've got your front rows are very different to your second rows and your back row. And so I just found the way they trained and the way that everything was specific to each position, and how a lot of the game is planned, and they have all these plays and they all have to learn them. They all know where each one's supposed to be. Yeah, there's some moments of flair when something crazy happens, but it was just so technical. I didn't appreciate it at all. I just didn't appreciate the amount of science that went into playing rugby. Because I was so used to football. I think that's what it was. think it just opened my eyes. It was just a new page for me. I don't want to sound disrespectful to football at all. It's not. It's very similar now. You know, in top flight football, you know, the science of football is huge. But I just saw a massive difference. You know, there wasn't a very big gym culture in football at that time, where it was massive in rugby. Because if you don't do it, your opponent's doing it, and you're going to get hurt. So it's not that you can, you know, just dodge around somebody. If they catch you, and you're gone.
And that's something which when I was getting involved in this area was that there was a reputation that rugby maybe was ahead in sports medicine terms of football. So that's what your experience is as well?
I think that was probably my experience when I first went to Tigers. And having now been exposed back into football in and around Leicester City again, we're working with the WSL, and I often get called into clubs to look at a sticky rehab, or, you know, someone's got a bit of a problem, and you know, and you're right up against the rock face sometimes. You just sometimes miss certain things, or, you know, there's something that could be added, or those sort of things. You get pulled in, and I think football now are doing a great job. You know, they do have a really good philosophy now in a lot of the clubs around, you know, the science of the game, athletic performance, how players train, their minutes, the data. GPS data is a massive thing, you know, and how that integrates now into the medical team is massive. Same in football and rugby. I think I just saw rugby doing it sooner, you know, looking at the data. They all had GPS data, and how we integrated the players back using that data. I felt like we were doing that a lot sooner in rugby than they were in football, but they're about on a par now. I'd say that it's on a par. I think, you know, the only thing I think that rugby are still making more strides in is concussion management. You know, that's where I think rugby are still ahead of the curve.
So how did you transition? You transitioned to a full-time role at Leicester?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I went from being a consultant into I joined the strength and conditioning staff first, because obviously there was a need to have somebody who was just that conduit between strength and conditioning and medical. So I joined the strength and conditioning team first, full time, and then progressed to that role becoming more medical, because obviously I could transition across that timeline of, you know, if we've got more people with acute injuries and we need more hands on this end, then I could slot into that role. If we had long-term rehab, I could sit between the two. And, you know, am I a performance coach, an S&C coach? No, I'm not. That's why I've worked with a multidisciplinary team. People are specialists in their area, and that should be respected, you know. And in reality, a multidisciplinary team is named that for a reason. There's lots of disciplines within the team. It's not all one type of discipline, you know. And I think that's something I've seen change over the years, is that very traditionally, you know, it'd be a couple of physios and a strength coach, you know. And now you've got strength coaches, you've got a physio, you've got a rehab specialist, massage therapist, an osteopath, a chiropractor, a nutritionist, you know, a mindset coach, a sports psychologist. You know, that's a multidisciplinary team, you know, and that's where a lot of clubs have gone to now.
And like you moved into a more senior position there, so in terms of managing that whole thing, were you involved in building that sort of thing out? Was that in situ then?
Yeah, so a lot of it was, I mean, I was lucky enough to sort of transition through my route through the club while that was evolving, you know, so I kind of learned with it as it went, and the experience was learned as I went along, because a lot of, you know, disciplines were being introduced, and a lot of new philosophies were being introduced as we moved along, you know, a lot more science, a lot more data, a lot more focus on, you know, the mindset of the players and the psychology, and you know, we've seen in recent years now that there's still a stigma around that now, and there's been huge strides made with mental health and how you manage that, you know, because in sport it's huge, you know, usually it's a one size fits all type approach, or it has been historically, you know, and even when it came to players being injured, how people cope with being injured, especially if it's long term, is massively different. You can't treat players the same. You just can't, because somebody will, accept the fact they've got injured immediately and crack on. Other people will, get sad and angry. They go through all these stages that you would see with grief sometimes. And until a player sort of commits to a process, you're never getting what you need out of it, Sorry. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be in a situation where I wasn't sort of brought into something and dropped in cold, and I had to learn a lot of new things all at once. It was like an organic process of lots of new things coming on board, I know you've probably heard of like the Alter G. So when we first saw the Alter G, we were like, what is this thing? What is going on here? And I remember us doing our research on it. We looked into it really in depth. We had to do a presentation to the board about why we would need this bit of kit. And, Tigers were quite progressive at the time and really helped us get that bit of kit in. And it was, when we first got it, we were one of the few people with an Alter G actually on the training site. And now all the clubs have got them, But I think Tigers at the time were in a position where they were considered the best club in the country. They were making strides to just progress on every single front. And they were really supportive of that, And I think now they've turned it around and they're coming back, and they're getting back to where they needed to be, But it was good for me at the time, I suppose, and everybody else who worked through that time. When I left in 2015, the lead up to that, we'd had opportunities left, right and centre with all sorts of new technologies and all sorts of opportunities. So I suppose really, organic is the word I'd like to use, is that you end up in this situation where your practice and your philosophies and your staff and your perception of how your department should be set up kind of grows. But I think the one thing I had, and the one thing I was determined and will always be determined to do, is never, ever judge people on their qualification alone. There are certain standards set out within the criteria that you have to stick to. Everyone has to have standards, and that's right. But again, I would hope that, some of the stuff that I went through originally, not being a physio, being sports rehab, it was a tough time to get through it, but only because you weren't seen as a credible option. Whereas I would always hope that we were accommodating of everyone and anyone, just be good at what you do and make a difference. And so we had a really good example of that, I think, is that we had a particular issue with players coming over from overseas, Islanders particularly, Fijians, Samoans. They would pull their calves historically within a few weeks of having arrived. And we had a big multidisciplinary meeting. We had sports science there, we had S&C, me, all my team, everyone was around the table trying to look at the data and wonder why this was happening. And we had an intern with us at the time as a graduate sports rehab. And he just threw into the mix. He said, is it because we've put them predominantly in trainers and boots? Because these guys live in flip-flops. They live in flip-flops and they wear shorts all the time, even in the snow. They're crazy. Is it because we're detraining their foot intrinsics and therefore we're getting calf issues? And we all sat there and looked at him. We had some really senior people around the table. We kind of went, yeah, it is. But I hope that we as a group of people had created an environment where no one was scared to speak up. No one was working in a silo. I'd quite often turn to Bobby Saubuts, the head physio, and say to him, mate, come and have a look at this for me, please, just to check what I'm doing. He would come and ask me to look at something he was doing in rehab. And we were very proactive in that way to make people share and understand you don't know everything, but somebody might know. And so please don't work in a silo. So I think if there's one thing that I thought that I did a little bit different was giving people that voice to speak.
Yeah, it's definitely great to be in an environment where you can be open and not be, because sport can definitely be a sort of panicking, or you're a bit conscious about maintaining your position and keeping credibility and so on. So it's good to hear that you had that environment where you're able to ask for second opinions and so on.
I would hope so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then how did you come to leave Leicester?
Well, obviously I've been there for 12 years. I've been head of department for 6. We were going through a bit of a change in the club, and it got to a point where they had review after review after review. And I think they just decided that they were going to try changing it up a little bit. And do you know, honestly, for a year, 2 years after the event, I still hadn't spoke to my other half and said to him that when you sit down in the room with the chief executive and say, you know, we're having a rethink, we're going to restructure, there's a few people leaving, you're one of them. I couldn't compute what he was saying to me, because, you know, we had a really good return from injury stat. We had low re-injury rates. So I couldn't compute what he was saying to me for a bit. In fact, it was a long time I couldn't compute it, if I'm honest, because I'm a very logical person, as you might have guessed. And so for me to even sit here and tell you that's what happened was a massive step to me, because it took me, I would say, 2 years before I admitted it properly to anyone, for me to actually admit it, because I couldn't come to terms with it. I couldn't come to terms with it. It had been my life. And, you know, when you look at it in sport, it happens all the time. It's no reflection on you. It's just, that's what happens. Things change, people move on, you know. And so that's how, and interestingly, when I left, they retained me on a contract to do rehab as an external contractor, which was great because I still had a connection with the club. But that's how I came to leave, and it was quite a difficult time, a really difficult time for me, and it really affected me massively. I can't say that I think I've struggled with mental health issues ever up to that point. And it took some significant events for me to actually break down and realise that it had affected me the way it did. And I got a chance to go and work at Worcester Warriors on covering somebody's maternity leave. And honestly, this is going to sound really dramatic, and I'm sorry if it does. But I went to Worcester Warriors, and I think it literally saved my life, because I was back in the environment that I knew. I was back in an environment where, you know, I was valued for what I did. And honestly, I'd spent 3 years with Worcester, and I enjoyed it more than anything that I've ever done. Just because I was back in the environment doing what I did, and I rehabbed and I treated and I went home, and it was a great place to work. And it basically put me back on track to go, do you know, it wasn't me. It was just the system. It was just the situation. They had to do what they had to do. And I just didn't know how to get the help to get over it. You know, and some people will be surprised at that, I think, if they hear this, because I'm one of these people, nobody thinks that anything would bother me at all. But literally, it was bad at the time, but also good in a way that it changed me as a person and made me kind of look up and go, what else do I want to do? Yeah. So there you are. You want the answer. You weren't expecting that.
Yeah, no, it's good. Well, I definitely didn't know that. So was this? So but you'd set your practice up at this point as well?
Yeah, I had. I'd set up Jigsaw in 2013. And the idea was, the vision was, I'd been to Pure Sports Medical in London a lot with some of the players. And I remember walking into this building, and there was a reception and a glass wall, and I could see into the gym, and it was a really dynamic place, and there was treatment rooms, there was all these people. So basically it looked like I'd picked up professional sporting environment and I'd moved it to the general public. I thought, what a great idea. That's what I need to do. So Jigsaw was started by virtue of the fact I was offered a chance to go on a trip to London to Monte Carlo on a sponsored bike ride. And as it happened, my other half injured his back quite badly, and I couldn't travel. So I put an advert out for a therapist, and somebody replied. I met them at the services in Derby one day, told them about the gig, and he went, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And the next day he got picked up in a transit van by some random person, and off they went, London to Monte Carlo. And that was the first job we ever did as Function Jigsaw. And while he was away, I just thought, well, why not? Let's jump in with both feet and start this up. And we got a little room in Leicester, and there was 2 beds and a reception desk, and that's how we started. And then we moved to a little unit that used to be a doctor's surgery. And when we came in, it was very 1970s and very ugly. And I didn't think it was going to work for me. And one of my clients is a builder. He said, well, let's go and have a look at it again. And we went to look. Told him what my vision was. I said, I need to walk into this room and there needs to be a glass wall so I can see into the gym, because obviously I've got this pure sports medical in my head. We can do that. We can do that, no problem. So we paid the deposit, we got the unit, and we proceeded to bash it around all over the place. And now when you walk through the front door, the first thing you see is a glass wall and the gym. So I got there, and now we operate, with I actually have 4 members of staff from April, 4 members of staff, 3 contractors, and we've got a list of contractors all over the country because we do events. So what we now do is deliver what I believe is a true multidisciplinary service to the general public. And again, I've encouraged that, people just don't keep their clients in their room. If they've got a problem, they share it. They swap practitioners if somebody's got a better knowledge. If they need sports massage, they go and see sports massage. If they need chiropractic, we refer to a partner that we use in Leicester. And that's what we've tried to encourage here. I have still continued with seeing my core of elite athletes. So I've still got athletes and rugby players and footballers and all sorts of people that still come and see me. And then I get called into clubs on occasion to just review certain things, or if they're a man down and they need hands on deck, then I can go in and help, because I can just slot back into that environment without too much trauma and then come away. I've done my leading a department thing now. I've just got experience, take it, and I shall leave. So that's what we did. So yeah, that's how Jigsaw started, and it's going really well now. We started off with 2 clients in the first week, and I think last week we had 120 through the door. And I think now our client base is up to just short of 5,000. So it's gone really well. And I'm still out and about doing bits and pieces. I'm not at the clinic all of the time. We work now with, we pick up contracts. We did a contract with British Ski and Snowboard when we first started, delivering their medical care for their guys. We're working with Leicester City ladies now with the WSL. That's a really good thing to be doing. And I went to do a bit of work with British Athletics, doing a lot of their medical ops and governance type work, because I thought that was an area of my practice that I needed to improve on. If I was going to sort of start consulting to clubs on how to set up your medical team, the governance components of it had to be in place and all the systems in place. So I went to work with them for a couple of years, and then COVID hit and I ended up being the COVID officer. What a joy that was. And by the way, just throwing Olympics in there as well. So we had the joy of getting them all to the Olympics with all the testing that they required us to do at the time. But hey, it all paid off. I got nominated for being a COVID champion in the workplace and won it. There you are. I got a certificate and everything.
That's good. Put it next to the Everton shirt. That's perfect.
That's about as useful.
Yeah, no, great. That's really interesting. We know a lot of people at British Athletics, and there's a really good team there. So that's quite interesting that you went in on that kind of operations side. Yeah. Well, just a couple more questions, because I know limited time. But in terms of who would you say has had the biggest influence, or people that have had the biggest influence in your career?
We mentioned one earlier, Mick Yeoman, just because he gave me a chance. The guys at Salford University, Julian Hatcher and all those guys. Sorry, that's popping up. Julian Hatcher and those guys, and actually a lot of the guys within Basrat have always encouraged and been supportive and helped whenever you need help. They've always helped me. They've been brilliant. From a professional perspective, I suppose a guy called Calvin Giles. He's English, but he lives in Australia now. He's a performance coach. He's like he comes in and analyses teams and does reviews on various bits. And I remember him sitting me down and and just actually telling me that the only person that was holding me back was me, because I was doubting myself. Should I be in this environment? Can I run the department? Why? I can't believe you're saying I could run it. I don't think I can. I'm not a physio. Does it matter, Jules? You're the most organised. You're the one with the biggest contribution to make from a management perspective. You're the only one who's worked in management outside of this industry. So he actually fundamentally made me believe in myself. Clinically is Cal Palmer, without a shadow of a doubt, the doctor, sports med doc. He taught me so much when I was at Leicester Tigers. I've got so much respect for him. When you're working in rugby, sometimes directors of rugby can be very het up individuals, and he without doubt coached me into remaining calm and objective and just delivering information sensibly. The things he taught me really invaluable. I think there are many more people that I could say have inspired me and helped me, because that's just the way of the industry. But Craig White, have you heard of Craig White as well? Yeah, so Craig White, again, another big influencer on my career, made me think about myself very differently, gave me the confidence to actually speak out and articulate my opinion. He's a great guy, funny, but one of the most clever, considered people I've ever met.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, you got a few there. That's good. That's great. No, I really appreciate you sharing your time on that. And yeah, definitely some interesting things which I didn't know before this. So yeah, no, that's good. But no, I'm looking forward to coming in and seeing the glass wall as well.
Yeah, come in anytime. We've always got brew on the go, and there's always biscuits in the tin, so you'll be very welcome.
Perfect. Yeah, get some jammy dodgers in, or I'll bring those if you've not got them.
You can bring the jammy dodgers, and I'll show you the glass wall. I'm not sure I'm bringing much to the party, but anyway.
No, I really appreciate it, Julie, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.